Good afternoon. We are at war with China. We haven't always thought of it as a war, but China believes that they are at war with us. This is a war fueled by China's economic, geopolitical, and military aspirations and its expansionist agenda among the coalition of the corrupt, which I refer to as a large group of developing nations which are increasingly sharing a tight economic geopolitical bond with China. So let me tell you how China believes it's going to win this war in which we are engaged. Let's start at the 2019 meeting of the Chinese Communist Party, where the premier, Li Keqiang, made a very revealing and uncharacteristically transparent statement. And he said, and I quote from the official record, "Our capacity for innovation is not strong, and our weakness in terms of core technologies for key fields remains a salient problem." So let me translate that for you. China has a technology innovation problem, and that means they have to rely on other methods to develop and access technology and to deploy technology. This is China's Achilles heel. But China is overcoming the limitations and the vulnerability of this Achilles heel. And they're doing so in a number of ways, which I will outline in a moment. But rest assured, China is committed to winning this war against the United States and our allies, and it has a plan for doing so. And here's why this is what the premier said is a salient problem, and why China cannot win this war without acquiring these technologies. So the transfer of technology is essential. It is a fundamental requirement for China's program to dominate the globe, the global economy, economically, geopolitically, and militarily. Technology must be transferred. It cannot develop this technology alone. But it's come up with some very creative ways. But let me tell you a little bit about how China is going to create this coalition of the corrupt, and it's doing so already, currently in probably more than 90 nations. China's strategy is comprised of two massive, technologically sophisticated and complex initiatives. They're really unprecedented in terms of their complexity. Each one strengthens China's economic and geopolitical and military ambitions. And here's what the two programs are. Interestingly enough, they're both grounded in space. The first one is China's satellite-based e-commerce initiative that by 2035 it intends to deploy to any developing nation willing to commit to receiving it. So basically what's going to happen is China will develop a portal, an e-commerce portal, and they will develop it. And what does that do? It does several critical things. The first thing that it does is it creates a new market for China goods and services. It creates a new market for the distribution of synthetic drugs, as was mentioned earlier. It creates a market for everything that we see for sale in the United States coming from China is now going to be deliverable through a sophisticated e-commerce system to developing nations around the world. This binds China and each of these nations together. By 2035, China intends to fully deploy this e-commerce program. Now, this program is going to be delivered by a constellation of some 13,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. That's just a couple of hundred miles above the surface of Earth. So as China develops its military strategy along with its geopolitical and economic strategy, it is reaching into space to militarize low Earth orbit through this deployment of satellites that are also producing a lot of revenue. Now, where is this revenue going? Well, much of it is going to go back to China. But in these other developing nations, 90, 100, 110 of them, it's going to be going to corrupt leadership regimes. It's less likely to benefit the people of these countries, more likely to benefit both China directly and these government officials, corrupt government officials. So that's a problem right out of the gate. But this program is part of the Belt and Road Initiative of China, but it's at the high end of the pyramid. So if you look at the provision of sophisticated e-commerce services at the top of that pyramid of Belt and Road, that's where you will find this. Now, the second program, it almost sounds a little science fiction-esque, but it is not, I assure you. It is based on a technology and a system that was developed in the early 1970s by Dr. Peter Glaser, a space scientist. And this is solar power satellite system. Solar power satellites are designed to collect large, massive amounts of solar energy, huge solar arrays that will be basically manufactured on Earth, sent into geostationary orbit, assembled in orbit, and will be delivering sustainable solar energy through microwave radiation and other types of delivery mechanisms by 2060 or 2065. This is China's plan. This is the second stage of this strategy to pull in and bond with the developing nations of the world. By the way, these developing nations, the overwhelming majority of them rank extremely high as corrupt nations on the Transparency International Index. So these are nations which will become and are becoming China's partners. Now, by 2065, China wants to be able to deploy this universally. By 2050, China intends to develop the first gigawatt of electricity from space, 22,000 miles up. Again, another part of the militarization frontier that China is working to develop right now. This is all part of that master strategy. Now, the interesting thing is that the United States, NATO countries, many parts of Eastern Europe, many parts of Asia, originally supported the development of this solar power satellite system. The patents, dating again back to the early 1970s, have been updated now by China. They possess over 100 new patents for this technology. And here's the curious thing. Why did the United States and our allies leave this technology on the table, this tremendous opportunity? It had to do for environmental considerations. There was a lot of concern about microwave radiation. So when we left that initiative, it was picked up by China. So now China is going to move forward with this, is currently moving forward with it, and 1 gigawatt of energy generated from space is enough to power 300,000 to 700,000 homes, for example. So just even 1 gigawatt is going to be a sizable demonstration of China's capability. 10 to 15 years later, deploying it to nations. Now, can you imagine the geopolitical and economic impact and the military impact of being able to supply your allied countries with uninterruptible, sustainable energy at a cost and a price point that you assign? That is a tremendous part of the highest level of the Belt and Road Initiative. And yet China is well on the way of doing this. So if you look at what China's intent is, it is to outpace the United States in terms of economic performance. And it's on the way to doing that. And the problem is that China sees economic and geopolitical performance in terms of military terms. Now, it's very interesting that as part of the demonstration of this capability, President Xi Jinping has created, or is really delivering on a promise to the Chinese Communist Party of something called military-civil fusion. It is a program whereby the military is being integrated into every aspect of technology development in cyberspace. And by the way, these two programs that I talk about are intensive cyber-related programs. So one of the ways in which China will succeed here is to transfer this technology. And how are they going to do that? Well, we used to see a lot of espionage agents taking information, come to conferences, and they would acquire booklets. Then we moved to cyberspace, and we saw a lot of cyber espionage, which we still do. But there are other ways. China has been investing in corporations. They have been performing mergers and acquisitions in many, many markets around the world. Now, here's one of the problems. They also invest in market joint ventures. They also invest in research ventures. There are major research ventures going on right now among multiple countries, including the United States, European countries, Asian countries, all cooperating on major research initiatives with China. One particular example involves a South Korean company, a major manufacturer, that has probably 15 or 16 research centers located around the world. Intellectual property developed at each one of these centers moves from one center to the next, from Poland or France or Canada or England or the United States to South Korea, to Singapore, to Japan. And they end up at 2 research centers in China. So while we are regulating and restricting the transfer of intellectual property, the backbone of technology and the development of technology, we are still losing it. So we are restricting China's ability to invest in technology, but we're not really restricting joint ventures. We're not really restricting these market joint ventures and research initiatives that are creating the major part of this problem and basically enabling China to move forward on these 2 massive, complex programs that I've talked about. So here's another issue that is of great concern. As we talk about investing, China's investment in companies, China has invested a lot of money using something called SSBT, State Street Bank and Trust, China Treaty investment instruments. Now, these investment instruments are believed to be money from the intelligence and the military side of the powerful Japanese investment firms and banks. Now, here's the problem. There was a major corporation based in Japan that created a global joint venture, started out as a national joint venture, with a major consulting company. They do IT security assessments, cloud migration strategies, anything that looks at e-commerce. They make these kinds of assessments. They help defend your companies against attacks. The Chinese military, if you believe in the nature of these China treaties, came in and acquired several percentage points of equity in this company. Now think about that. If you're with the government or you're on a board of directors, China now owns, let's say, 2 or 3% of that corporation, which gives them credibility in the global market, creates sort of a complicated governance issue for both governments and businesses. Certainly creates a national security issue. Using these funds, a decade ago, China invested in over 170 Japanese publicly traded companies. Again, a serious threat. Now these new SSBT funds are used to acquire positions in strategic areas where China lacks the innovative development capability. So something to watch as we move forward, but we need to do more than watch. As I mentioned on these joint ventures, we need to figure out mechanisms, create legislation, create new laws, work cooperatively together to reduce the transfer of these technologies which enable China. Because I will tell you this, without access to these technologies from the United States, from South Korea, from Japan, throughout Europe, China cannot succeed. It is entirely dependent. And so we have to work together. All of our nations who have an interest in this, we have to work together, and if we don't, then China will prevail. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator. Most appreciated.